Today, we're going somewhere where people have definitely gone before. People have made tier lists about controllers before, but have they been this thorough? I think not. We're starting off with something that a lot of people have probably never heard of. The Atari Paddle. I couldn't find the original Pong or a good picture of the original Pong controller, so we're using this. Let me just say right off the bat, terrible controller. And I know it's terrible because it has a knob. And how many controllers have knobs these days? That's right, none. I'm thinking C. I think this was the controller to the Atari 2600. It is quite literally called the Atari Joystick, and it's the very first joystick in history. I'm thinking it's an A tier. Now, this is the Atari Jaguar controller. The only reason I put this in here is because there's a lot of controllers. For some odd reason, at this time period, they thought they needed a full number pad. I think it's trash tier. That controller is way too big, and there's not enough useful buttons on it. That's okay, the Atari Jaguar was also trash. It's the Apple. It was the Apple game system that they made way back in the day. It's shaped like a boomerang. If you squint at all controllers these days, they're almost all boomerangs. Little thick boomerangs. This controller had a ball in the middle of it, but was it useful? Probably not. It has the stuff that was a little necessary for a controller back in the day. I'm thinking it's D. The Nintendo Entertainment System controller. It's a classic. Square shapes are not good for hands. I feel like you need more like rounded shapes. So the square feel of the controller would get a little uncomfy. A very solid A tier. Now the Nintendo Zapper. I don't know how many games you could actually play with this thing. Maybe like one. I'm thinking it's a D tier. The Power Glove. I think it's trash. The Super Nintendo controller. More buttons than the original Nintendo System controller. It's rounded. I think it's easily S. Now the Sega Genesis controller. The D-pad and all the buttons just seem like they were in the right place. The controller was a little bit bigger. I think this is the peak of this type of controller design. I think this is God tier. Now the Sega Saturn controller is here because technically there was actually a Sega Genesis controller that looked exactly like this, but it just was for the Sega Genesis. I don't like the glossy finish. It's kind of gross, and you know that's gonna have like finger marks all over it. I'm thinking S. Might be lower. I'm thinking A. So this controller is called the Microsoft Sidewinder controller. Computers back in the day didn't really have controllers made for them. I mean, you would use like mouse and keyboard anyways. For people that might have wanted to play a video game on their PC and wanted to use a controller, you might have used one of these. I don't think it's a good looking controller. I kind of like that it has the little dooply doops off the end of it. Is there a technical name for that? Maybe it's B. The Neo Geo Controller. These are actually surprisingly comfortable. The thing that's unique about this controller is this is a joystick. And just for that, I think it goes into S tier. It's a big step, putting a joystick on a controller. That's a huge step for history. So this is the controller for the Commodore 64 console system, or gaming console, I think, actually. The thing that was really important about this controller was this thing right here. If you see that little sliver of orange, that's the first ever trigger. And that's huge for history. I'm putting it A. The Sega Dreamcast controller. I like that on it you get a joystick and a D-pad. The screen in the middle was a very cool concept. Done way better by Nintendo later in the future. I'm thinking A. The original PlayStation controller. Absolutely amazing. Besides the Sega Genesis controller, this one is like the only other controller that's actually good without any analog controls. Great button layout, great feel to the controller, absolutely God tier. Now I do think Sony cheated. They kind of went into the future and already had a great controller like right at the start. They like went to the future, brought their controller back, and then just made it. I think it's God tier. Now by the color switch, you could obviously tell that this is now a PlayStation 2 controller. You know what's kind of crazy? If I switch back and forth, there's like no change. I think just copying the same controller, you should get deducted a little bit. So I'm gonna put in an S instead of God. Now the PS3 controller, it is now wireless. I actually think this is lower than the PS2 controller because although it had like batteries in it and they were rechargeable, B tier? The Ps4 controller. There's a distinct difference in this controller from the PS3 controller. The sticks are a little bit further apart. They're a little bit more comfy. The whole controller is a little bit more ergonomic. The only thing that's gonna keep this out of God tier for me, these little knobs on the early ones, they would like fall apart like easy. They later fixed it. The amount of disintegrating PS4 controllers that I've used in my life, I'm gonna need to put it in S. It did get fixed later though. Now going back in time, the Nintendo 64 controller. I like that it looks like a spaceship. It has a lot of personality to it. The only thing was, this joystick, in one of the Mario Party games, you needed to like spin it as fast as you could, and I did. And I was really good at that minigame. But I also put a blister in the middle of my hand literally every single time. I don't know if you've ever had a blister in the middle of your hand, but golly, it's annoying to do literally everything. I do think it's weird that there was only like 2 main buttons on the front of the controller. Even when Nintendo made this controller, they already knew they didn't have it. I think it's a solid B tier. The Nintendo GameCube controller. I love this controller. I also believe it is the best controller that Nintendo has ever made. It has stood the test of time, and Nintendo has literally kept selling it. Nintendo already knows that this is their best controller. I think it's a God tier. DK bongos. Fun fact, I don't know if people know this, but there's actually 5 buttons on this thing. One of the tops is technically 2 buttons. And then you have that that start button. Besides that, there was, what, like 3 games made for him? But I think I'm gonna put it in D for DK bongos. Oh, the Duke. So I'm an Xbox boy. I've had every single one of them, and I've had the Duke. This controller is huge, and when I was young, did not have my fully grown mitt. This controller is much too large for me. But as an adult, it's a surprisingly comfortable controller. Do I think this is good? It's okay. Its competitors are the GameCube controller, and the PS2 controller. I do think it is weaker than both of them. B tier. Xbox Controller S, I believe? This controller looks so similar to a modern controller. It's missing 2 things from a modern controller. I don't think it has shoulder buttons. I don't know, it had great hand feel. This is kind of a slept-on controller. I think it's at least as good as the PS2 controller. The Xbox 360 controller, I do think this is the peak for Xbox. Very ergonomic, hands fit in it super cleanly. I don't mind the battery thing, especially at this time, because this is when wireless just became a thing. It's a God tier. There's no way it's not. Okay, so the Xbox One controller, slightly different shape to the body. Honestly, I think the Xbox 360 controller actually feels better than the Xbox One controller. I would just say the sticks on the Xbox One controller were probably better. Why does it still need to take batteries? At this point, like, people have already figured it out. The rechargeable controller, Sony has figured it out, and let's face it, you're Microsoft. I'm putting in A tier. The Xbox One S and One X controller literally didn't change it at all. Why does this need batteries? I'm putting it in trash tier. We are now getting into motion controls. The Wii Remote. This might be the best motion controller. Honestly, I don't understand how batteries lasted in these things for so long. I feel like you could use the same 2 batteries for the entire year. So normally I don't like gimmicks all that much, and I do believe motion controls are a gimmick. But man, did this gimmick sell. I think it's God tier. Oh man, I really don't want to put it up there though. But it's too monumental. So the Nintendo Wii controller with the nunchuck, you just gave it like a joystick and a button. I actually used to play Super Smash Bros. Brawl only with the Wii controller and the nunchuck because I thought it was just straight up better than the GameCube controller. I was very wrong. I think it goes into B tier. Wii Boxing was great. The PlayStation Move controllers. This was a direct result of the Wii having so much success. I'm putting them in C. They're a wannabe Wii controller. The Xbox 360 Connect. It's a gimmick, and I think it goes into C tier. Who wants your body to be your controller anyways? You could always just work out. Oh, talking about working out. The Wii Fit board, or the Wii Balance board exercise. I'm gonna put it in D. The Wii Classic Controller. I mean, it did straight up steal the PlayStation layout. Also, these controllers were very small. I hate that the A button's all the way to the right. I think this is a hard C tier. The Wii U gamepad, exciting stuff. I actually don't mind this layout all that much. Also, I'm fine with the A button being off to the right on this controller because that's where you can rest your finger and it won't be in like a weird spot. It's D tier because no one bought this thing. The Wii U Pro Controller, I'm fine with the A button right where it is because you can rest your finger on it or your thumb very easily on it. I kind of also like that it has a unique look. It's a little bit more curvy than all the other controllers on the market. It has all the buttons that you would need. The 2 joysticks up there, if it's fine on your left hand, I can't see why it wouldn't be fine on your right hand. I think this one's actually higher than people think. I think it's an A tier. I think these controllers were actually like kind of shitty though. Like I think they broke like all the time. But besides that, I think the layout's great. I'm thinking A. My gosh. The Xbox remote. There's actually, okay, so Xbox is not the only person that released a remote for their game console. I believe the PlayStation 2 and the PlayStation 3 both had a remote for their console. It doesn't really make sense to have one, but back in the day, people would use their consoles as DVD players, and I guess you would get a remote for that, but I definitely have one. And I distinctly remember playing games with it just to see if you could play games with it. It's not a good controller. Confident that it's trash. The Guitar Hero guitar, but you can't really use this for anything else. I know people have used it for other stuff. Like, I'm pretty sure I watched someone beat Dark Souls on this thing. But it died out for a reason. I think it's a solid C tier. Flight stick controllers. I think they're so cool. And I think the games that go with these are so cool, but there's like no games that go with them. It's the only controller that can make you feel like a pilot. I'm putting it in an S. Who doesn't want to feel like a pilot? The racing controller, or the steering wheel controller, or whatever you want to call it. They have probably been around ever since racing games have been made. They're like really good now too. I'm thinking it's either S or God. I mean, naturally, you're only talking about racing games with these. If you tried to game on one of these things, like if you tried to play Warzone with one of these, it would be awful. I think it's S tier because it's really only meant for certain games. And that's the thing that holds it back. The fight stick. I think it's in the same boat as the flight stick and the racing steering wheel. Also, all of these are not gimmicks because they stood the test of time, especially fight sticks. I'm putting it in S. I'll put it in the same category as the racing steering wheel and the flight stick. I say it's a little bit, for the people who've never seen this controller, this is the Xbox Adaptive Controller. I'm gonna put it in God tier already because it like lets people with disabilities play video games, and everybody knows the world needs more gamers. But that's actually not the whole reason that I'm going to put it in God tier. It's because I actually think this is the future of gaming. Sure, it doesn't look like much. It literally looks like a D-pad and 2 giant buttons, but that's not actually the thing that's the future of gaming. See, on the other side of this, the back side of this controller, is a bunch of hookups that let you do all the other controls, like X, Y, R, RB, and you can hook it up to like whatever you want. You could add more buttons, add triggers, joysticks. You could also like attach sensors to your fingers. This is what they kind of already do. And whatever that finger like twitches, like that's how you press the button. You don't actually need to press anything. This is what we're looking at for the future of gaming, honestly. It's going to God. The Nintendo Switch Joy-Cons. Why did I say it like that? The Nintendo Switch Joy-Cons. I think they're actually terrible. I think it's very cool that they gave you 2 controllers with your console. They're kind of whack and they're super expensive. They're like $75. Not to mention the sticks start drifting like super early on, and Nintendo said they have no issues drifting, which is a plain lie. An easy trash tier. The Nintendo Switch Pro Controller. This controller has like no personality. The A button is still in the wrong spot. You need to put your thumb on the edge of the controller most of the time when you're playing. It's an okay controller. I think it's a B. There's nothing special about it. I actually think they should put like the Nintendo GameCube button layout. I actually think this is an untapped potential for all the gaming companies, putting different size buttons I mean, Nintendo did it with the GameCube controller, obviously, and I think they could do it here. Voila! I fixed the Wii Pro controller. It's goofy. It's like a Nintendo thing to do. I just want the A button to be where your finger would be. But this one is a B tier. The Xbox Elite controller. I played with an Elite controller like 3 or 4 times in my life. I don't own an Elite controller, nor do I want one. I think the buttons on the back are extremely cool, not necessary. Especially not necessary when I need to pay $150 for it. Now for some people, money ain't a thing, but for me, $150, 30 meals at Taco Bell. I could eat for a whole month. Honestly, this is probably the best controller on the market, besides like third-party controllers. Too expensive. Back buttons are very cool. Gonna put it in A tier because they still need batteries. Like, actually, no, it doesn't. Does it? No, it doesn't. Oh, so you need to pay $150 so you don't need batteries anymore. I'm gonna put it in A tier anyways. The DualSense controller. I think this is the best controller on the market right now. I mean, that isn't third-party. But third-party controllers, if you get an expensive third-party controller, they're nice. Super comfy. This is the new king. I know it hasn't even been out for that long, and no one can get their hands on it. Darn scalpers. What, the trigger feedback thing is like really cool. It's a good feeling controller. And I'm an Xbox guy. This is a good feeling controller. Last, but certainly not least, keyboard and mouse. I mean, this is obviously not a gaming keyboard and a mouse. This is literally the picture of the Amazon Basics keyboard and mouse. It was the only decent picture of a keyboard and a mouse that I could find, so cut me some slack. This is like the easiest god in the world. Gamers love the press buttons. And keyboards have the most amount of buttons. And if you get a gaming mouse, you could get even more buttons on it. Also, the precision on a mouse compared to an analog stick is like crazy. I mean, unless like you're Fortnite and you make the auto aim for controllers absolutely ridiculous. It's God tier. Easy God tier. This is the final tier list. I made some quick adjustments. The flight stick and the steering wheel I brought down. The Commodore thing, I came down on that as well. And the only other change was the Sega Saturn controller. That gloss finish I just cannot stand, so I put it in trash. It was originally an A. Nothing has ever fallen so far. But you have come to the end of the video, and if you came this far, might as well like the video. I mean, I just started my YouTube career not too long ago, so if you like this video, I mean, you probably will like my future content because it's only up from here. But thanks for watching. Peace on the streets.